morning from the Lone Star State. How are you doing this morning, Brian?
Good morning to you, Brent. Afternoon here in Jerusalem.
How do you say, so like here, a very common way to talk in Spanglish is Buenos tardes. But what is the natural culture there in Israel? What do people say? It's like good morning, and then the afternoon. Is it like there's a phrase there that's kind of like
Yeah,
Buenos
good
tardes?
morning is the one that I know best, and everyone knows it here. It's Boker Tov, which means good morning. Tov is good, Boker's morning. It's switched around, but Boker Tov is good morning.
And good afternoon is what?
I don't remember.
Okay, good. Well, I was going to try and incorporate the native tongue, so we
I
could
know I
talk.
have known in the past, but I don't. Embarrassingly enough, I've not really done much in developing my Hebrew. I need to do more.
Well, we also say here in Texas, howdy. So howdy y'all is also a native
I
sort of
lived in
like
Texas for a
dialect.
long time, so howdy.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see you again. And last week we had a great discussion on, kind of what it meant to encourage people to pray for Israel.
Yeah.
And you also had a great video yesterday just talking about how prayer still works. We have a lot of things to be grateful for, that whenever the saints pray, great things can happen. And I think that's important. I think that was really well articulated and a great feature. I served my dad, Jimmy Evans, at XO Marriage, and also endtimes.com is a project we started together. And I enjoy these conversations about Bible prophecy
Yeah.
and the world that's unraveling around us. And you have such a great perspective, Brian. You're really a great value to not just the end time side of things, but also to the body of Christ, because you're able to have a microphone there and a video element that showcases real time what's happening in Israel. And I wanted to start off because I saw a news article this morning that to me is significant, and me trying to understand again the tunnel network that the Hezbollah and the Hamas groups have there is pretty wild and fascinating. But they just uncovered 6 bodies from the hostages. I think they're up to 30 now of hostages that they've either recovered or they've discovered, and they've discovered 6 in a tunnel system that they've just pulled out. Do you have any perspective on that?
Well, according to news reports here, the bodies were discovered really without any intelligence that led to their discovery. Apparently, a commander and his soldiers they just uncovered this tunnel and carefully went in and discovered the bodies and took them out and brought them back. The follow-up report indicates that they may have died as a result of oxygen deprivation because of a bombing by the IDF. Of course, the IDF didn't know they were there, but the idea is that there was a bombing that caused a fire that sucked the oxygen out of the air, and that probably is what killed them.
But they were saying this tunnel system, there was like a facade in front of it, and it was kind of a fake wall system, and then inside there were secure doors. And I guess I just still trying to figure out how that can be so prevalent and so misunderstood that they can literally be under your feet or going through parts of the geography there without knowledge. With the sophistication of the intelligence agency there in Israel, it's just fascinating to me that they still continue to uncover places that they are able to hide bodies, or bodies are maybe they were trying to escape, or maybe there's just systems that they just know where to kind of place people, and they just bet on the outcome, which is they're typically not going to find the people, but if they do, they're so far gone because they've gotten away quickly that it's just a really I guess secure way for the other side to be able to transport people or transport things. And again, I'm just trying to figure out where does that lead for Israel long term.
Well, there are hundreds of miles of tunnels. It's a literal labyrinth. And I know, as much as I can know, that Israel's not figured out every tunnel that's there. The IDF has gone into buildings, and yes, there have been trapdoors underneath rugs in living rooms or in kitchens, and ladders leading down to the labyrinth below. So these things have been built over the last 15 years. It's not something new. And I saw or heard a report recently that said something to the effect that this is the most complicated urban warfare that has happened in modern history.
Sure.
It's very complex. Add to that what we discovered just a few days ago. Actually, we knew it, but we actually saw for the first time Hezbollah's tunnel system, which makes Hamas's look like almost nothing. In Hamas, the ground is flat and sandy, and they've had to reinforce the tunnels. In Hezbollah in Lebanon, they've got bedrock. I mean, these are mountains, and they are burrowed into the mountains. I mean, and they're huge. They drive trucks through them. It reminds me, a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to go to Moldova. Moldova is a country right next to Ukraine, and I was there on a junket trip where we were learning about Jewish refugees that were being brought from Ukraine to Moldova, and then some were being brought here to Israel. Anyway, that was the trip. On that trip, our group had a chance to tour a huge, very well-known, perhaps the best well-known winery in Moldova. And it is in a labyrinth of rock caves. We drove through them. I mean, it was a whole city underneath the ground there. And when I saw the video put out by Hezbollah showing off their tunnel system, at least a small piece of it, it very much reminded me of what I experienced in Moldova a couple of years ago. There is no way that those tunnels were at all affected by the small or relatively small earthquake that hit Syria on Tish B'Av. It was too far away, and those tunnels cannot have been affected. There's someone who wrote an article saying that the earthquake may have had an impact on the decision not to attack Israel on Tish B'Av, and maybe it did. But the article also took a guess that these tunnels had collapsed and weapons had collapsed. It's an article that was written by a guy who lives in New York City. And, you know, it was a very nice wishful thinking kind of thing. I mean, hopeful thinking probably was better. It would have been very nice if that had been the case. And he proposed that perhaps Hashem, God, had protected Israel by doing that. And again, there may have been some kind of fear that was, came about as a result of that earthquake that may have prevented the attack. But I'm pretty sure that the primary reason it was prevented is because the imams in Iran saw the overwhelming military force that was being brought against them by the United States and its coalition partners. And yes, that was the answer to prayer. Regardless of how God did it, he did answer our prayers in preventing an attack on that day. But nonetheless, that tunnel system, I kind of wandered off from
Well, but the
tunnel system with the Hezbollahs, but yeah.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, So I just kind of curious if they outsource those tunnel systems to people that are, dangerous to Israel, and how much they give access to, terrorist groups to use those tunnel systems, and it's basically to the highest bidder. I don't know if that's.
Are you talking about Hezbollah's tunnel system?
Yes.
Well, Hezbollah is, an Iranian proxy. So
right, but I'm saying, would they give safe transport to Hamas?
Oh, I would think very, very likely that they do. Yes, there have been speculation that the tunnels go all the way from Beirut down to the southern border of Lebanon. So it probably is a massive underground system, and I think it's pretty clear that they use it extensively to protect those coming to see them, and Hamas is regularly in Lebanon. There's a Hamas presence in Lebanon and in Syria. So, yeah, I don't doubt at all. I mean, can't say for sure, but it makes sense that they would use it for that.
Yeah, well, it's just like the drug cartel in the United States. There's tunnel systems, reportedly found all over the southern border where they're trying to get, not just illegal immigrants in, but drugs through the borders. They're always trying to find clever ways of making sure that they have, central command over transportation of things, and there's just a cat and mouse game of that all the time. But if we knew that they were using those systems to, infiltrate America with, weapons that could be used against us, or terrorist cells, that makes that even more dangerous. And I just think, obviously we're talking.
I see what you're saying. I think I understand what you're saying now, that you're wondering if those tunnels actually come into Israel and they're being used to transport weapons or personnel back
At some point, yeah. I mean, where do those tunnels end up leading? I mean, if that's what I'm saying. They're still uncovering things,
right?
And how do you know that they're not getting into Israel somehow?
It's possible. I think it would be, if there was if the infiltrations were taking place, it would be very difficult for them to carry that out successfully. What is more likely, because Israel keeps such a close eye on everything, so it would have to be extremely, like one at a time in the middle of the night, going to did you ever see Hogan's Heroes?
Yeah.
Open up a log and they go down a tunnel, maybe something like that. What is more likely is that these tunnels are in place and do go into Israel, but they won't really be opened up and used until Hezbollah is ready to do a major attack. Mm-hmm. In fact, they put out videos several years ago showing that they were going to come into Israel. They're going to break down the wall there, or fence wall between Lebanon and Israel. They were going to come in by sea, and they were going to come in from underground, which is why when October 7 happened a year ago, people up north all were convinced that Hezbollah was about to do the same thing, because they had seen this playbook. This playbook had been published. Hamas stole the playbook. Lebanon has not backed down from it. Lebanon is still pursuing that playbook, which indicates that yes, they have plans to infiltrate Israel in at least three different ways: by sea, by land, underground, and perhaps even by air, like Hamas did, coming in on gliders.
I like to think that our countries are playing offense and not just defense. Do you feel like Israel has equal countermeasures in place to infiltrate other places? I mean, or do they have sophisticated systems that, we talked about the Iron Dome and, David Sling and some of these other things that were, offensive and defensive countermeasures related to attacks. But do you feel like they just haven't flexed fully yet, and that really an attack like that couldn't happen? Because I've always believed that Israel is a premier power in the world, and with a small space, they've done pretty amazing things. I just wonder sometimes how reserved they really are. And I mean, what shocked me about October 7th was just how long it took Israel to respond and get there, and the horrific nature of what was able to happen in a period of time. It surprised me because I just thought Israel was more adept to, an attack like that. But
everyone here is very surprised too, and still sick about this. And there's a strong demand for answers, which will have to come at some point. In general, it appears that Israel had built up the idea that it was insulated from horror and terror by high-tech defensive measures. The multi-million, even billion-dollar walls that they put up that supposedly went down below tunnels, so that Hamas could not tunnel into Israel, and their high-tech supervisory things. And it turns out, of course, that Hamas was able to bypass all those things. It was able to knock down fences. It came in on terrorists came in on air gliders. What do you call them? And when they broke down the fence, they took motorcycles. And then the high-tech tanks that cost millions of dollars were taken out by little tiny drones who flew over the top of the tanks and dropped weapons. I mean, dropped rockets or bombs right on top of the tank and destroyed the multi-million-dollar tanks with a $2,000 or $3,000, if that, drone. So it turns out that Israel was overly confident in its defensive measures. Can it go into Lebanon? It would be very difficult on its own. Israel's already calling up its reserves who have been serving in Gaza, and they're being called back. Israel's army is not that big. People who serve in the regular army, they do so coming out of high school, and men serve for 3 years, women for 2. Some of them serve in a voluntary role instead of a military role. They do service kind of work. And then I believe until in your 40s or more, people who have been in the IDF serve in the reserves and can be called up. So you could be called up out of your job. You, Brent, at your age, could be called up and say, you need to come in and serve. And you would have to go from your job where you are right now, in your home, in your office, and step into Gaza. Can you imagine that? Mm-hmm. That's exactly what Israelis your age have been doing since October 7th. And they go into tunnels, and they go from one world literally to another, high-tech, 21st century world, and then into the horror of Gaza. So I don't know, it's difficult. Going into Lebanon was not going to be easy. It's going to be very, 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 very hard. With those tunnels, different terrain, rock, it will have to be a blitz that, if it happens, in my opinion, it will have to be a blitz that is done in partnership with the U.S. I don't think Israel can do it alone.
I agree with that.
I think there's another really big story here today, and I don't want to skip it. And that is, this morning in Israel, about 50 rockets were launched at Katzrin. Katzrin is perhaps the largest city in the Golan. It's perhaps a 30-minute drive from Tiberias, and you go up the Golan and you're in Katzrin. I'm very familiar with Katzrin. I'm there a number of times a year because my fiance's parents have a place there. In fact, I was in Katzrin on October 7 when everything literally happened. Wow. Which was on a Shabbat, by the way. And so Mara's parents and Mara all keep Shabbat, so they didn't have their phones on. I had mine on, and I was up at like 6:30 in the morning, and suddenly all of thousands and thousands of rockets were coming in. So I woke everyone up, and Mara and her parents, who are observant, all turned down their phones because it was a matter of life and death. And so Judaism allows you to do things on Shabbat if it's a matter of saving a life or preserving a life. So anyway,
is her family okay today with the rocket attacks?
Pardon?
Is her family okay today with the rocket attacks?
Yeah, well, her parents happen to be up there. They live in Jerusalem, but they keep this place in Katzrin, and they are there right now. So they had to go to their safe room, which is every home has to have a safe room that's reinforced to protect from attacks. And it's very disturbing. You might remember I was in Katzrin 3 months ago after interviewing Sarit with Alma. And I filed a report the next day that I was out on a walk before I headed back to Jerusalem. And suddenly overhead, boom, 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 I saw the rockets coming in, and they were being intercepted. Well, that day there were perhaps 15 rockets. Today there were 50. Also on that day they were they weren't landing in Katzrin, they were landing just beyond the southern side of Katzrin toward the Sea of Galilee, toward the Kinneret. Today they landed in Katzrin, the ones that got through, and they destroyed homes. It's a miracle. Nobody was killed or apparently even seriously injured. there was a siren that went out, but there are stories of, I think I saw one of a father saying a bomb or a rocket hit his house and he grabbed his kids and he couldn't go out the front door, so he went out a window, something like that. So it's very dramatic. And
But according to your analysis, they're pinpointing these attacks as not to lead to a major war, but they do have a plan because they've, according to the article, displaced 60,000 Israelis from their homes. So is this just a long?
No, this looks like an escalation. Probably in the minds of Hezbollah, a slight one. They would like to up the number from 60,000 to 80 to 100,000. And I'm sure a lot of people in Katsrin today are saying, can we stay here? And that's exactly what Hezbollah wants. They're hoping that they can turn the heat up slowly, without causing a war, a major conflict. But they are dictating the terms to Israel. They've basically destroyed Israel's sovereignty over its northern communities. And they're trying to extend a little farther south now, down into Katsrin. And these rockets, if you go to Hezbollah or Iranian news reports, they'll say, we were targeting a military base. Well, there is one nearby Katsrin, but they were deliberately targeting civilians. They were deliberately targeting families. And they hit their homes, where they live, their so-called safe places. It's sickening. I mean, here it's just, I got the news and I just didn't want to talk. I felt like I couldn't talk for about 30 minutes.
Sure.
It's like, it's overwhelming. It's sickening. Mm-hmm. At the same time, today, there's news that the hostage negotiations are probably going to fail. I didn't mention this in yesterday's news report that I filed, because hostage negotiations, in my opinion, were certain to fail anyway. Hamas is not about to give up its right to survive, and it's not about to give up hostages, because that's the one thing they have, a leverage thing they have over Israel. They're not going to give it up. So for all of the efforts of the U.S. to make this negotiation happen, to have the hostages released and bring about a ceasefire, it's futile, because Hamas is not going to agree to it. And even the U.S. right now is agreeing that Israel has complied with what they say needs to be done. And so it's Hamas that keeps saying, no, we're not going to do it. Well, what this means, according to news reports today, is that if in fact the hostage negotiations fail, and it looks like they will, there is a very real risk of a major regional war. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense, because even Ali Khamenei, the so-called supreme leader of Iran, the other day said, well, we won't attack Israel if we get a hostage deal. It was one way for him to back down the ladder. Well, now if a hostage thing fails, he's got to come back. And by the way, Iranian news reports are still saying we plan to attack. We plan to get revenge for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, on July 31.
Sure, I'm sure that's high on their list. I would imagine that's really high on their list.
Well, there is a funny side to this, at least funny to me. In looking at various articles today in Iranian media, they were giving several reasons why they've not attacked yet. There's some sort of a holy day thing coming up where they've got pilgrims going back and forth to Iraq, and they might get stuck, or our people might get stuck on flights. We might have to close our airways. And as I read it, I thought, you're not just talking. You're really not talking to your enemies here. You're talking to your own people, because they're trying to save face, because they announced they were going to do this and they still haven't done it. So now they have to give reasons to their own people about why they haven't done it, while pledging at the same time, we will do this. So I thought that was interesting. They were trying to reassure their own people that they hadn't lost control. They had their reasons for not attacking yet.
I'm sure the back channel talk with the political talk is it's massaged over and over again to make sure that what they're saying at the end of the day covers up their tracks and make sure that they're not falling on their face while trying to justify a lot of different things. But another thing I saw in the news I just wanted to mention was there was an attempted suicide bombing yesterday in Tel Aviv. I don't know if you saw that or not, that Hamas claimed responsibility for suicide attacks in Tel Aviv, which I would imagine is more touristy in that region. Is that a concern now for everyday civilians?
You're talking about the van the suit with the bomb in it, right? The van that exploded. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At first the report came out and they thought it was a criminal activity, and then some hours or even the next day they said, "Well, no, this was a terror attack." And yeah, that's a huge deal, because how did they do it? Here's another way that they've been able to go and far away, well, in Israeli terms, far from the Palestinian territories in Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, and fairly far away from Gaza. I mean, how did they get out? Almost certainly, by the way, these
How
terrorists...
far north is that from Gaza?
I don't know, 40 miles at the most, 30 miles? Not far. Most likely, the terrorists came out of Judea, Samaria, the Palestinian territories in the so-called West Bank. By the way, do you know why it's called the West Bank?
Tell me, please.
Because it's to the east of Israel, right? So why is it the West Bank? Well, in 1948, when Israel declared its independence and as a nation, as you know, all of the Arab countries around attacked.
Sure.
And Lebanon took control of all the land from eastern Jerusalem to the Jordan River. And so the west bank of the Jordan River was extended.
Got it.
And so it was the west bank of Jordans taking over that territory, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So that idea of it being a West Bank goes all the way back to 1948 until 1967, when Israel took it back. But that's the idea of West Bank.
That's good to know. I mean, those kinds of things, I'm sure, are very near and dear to the hearts and the minds of people that live there, because it represents a lot of the history. I would assume some of the things that we assign to our independence, the heroes of, like capturing our independence and the wars and everything that led to that, and the naming of things surrounding that. It's very important. I think we just use those words and we don't ever investigate what they mean. So
right. Yeah, we
talking
get used
about
to
the West Bank.
Yeah, most people don't know. I mean, there have been studies that show all of these protesters, these anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian protesters, saying, they want Palestine to be freed from the river to the sea. They don't know what river and they don't know what sea. They don't know it's the Jordan River, and they don't know that it's the Mediterranean Sea. They have no idea. But they are. From the river to the sea, a call for the Palestinians to have the land from the river to the sea means the destruction of Israel. That is Israel. Israel goes from the river to the sea. So that's all of Israel.
Well, so I follow this Instagram account. This guy goes around like Times Square and other places, and he just asks young people very basic questions like, can you name the vice president of the United States? How many states are there? And it's fascinating how tripped up these young kids get on the simplest questions about, domestic and just country trivia that should be very basic. And I don't know how it is.
Speaking of that, I'd like to encourage everyone who's watching, listening in, to start using Google Earth in your prayer time, right? And I have found this to be really, really educational and informative. I've now become fairly familiar with the geography of our planet, which I never had before. But by doing this, we're praying. It's a wonderful tool. We have an opportunity using Google Earth to pray over the whole planet and over countries and their capitals and oceans and seas by name and
Sure.
look at them. And I think this is something that is now easy to do. It's a wonderful tool at our disposal.
That's a
I
great
also,
idea.
I do want to mention that also the situation with Iran is extremely troubling. I mentioned this in the report that was released yesterday. It looks like Iran is going to be developing a nuclear weapon. It could go nuclear by the end of the year, according to this congressman who's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. He was on Face the Nation, and he said this on Sunday. Their opinion, House Intelligence Committee, coming from them, is that Iran could declare itself a nuclear nation by the end of the year. That's what, 3.5 months away. What that means is something big has to happen between now and then. Who will strike first? Will it be Iran? If Israel strikes first, I can't imagine Israel doing it without getting implicit, at least, approval for such an operation from the U.S. And it may be that now the argument behind the scenes, I suspect at this point may be, look, we have done everything you've asked us to do to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza and to get the hostages released. And as you now see for yourself, the problem is not on our side, it's on their side. And now, as you can see, Iran is about it will strike us. And they'll do it through Hezbollah, as well as, of course, from Iran, from Iraq, and from Yemen. And probably they will release terror cells that are embedded in the Palestinian territories.
What about Egypt? Will
Egypt,
Egypt be sympathetic?
I don't think so. I mean, there's always a possibility of problems in the Sinai Peninsula, because that's kind of a wild west. It's not west of us, but in terms of the U.S., it's kind of a wild west territory. It's open land, and there have been terror groups there in the past. Egypt has that's one reason Egypt has had a more secure and disciplined wall between Gaza and its border than Israel had. And nobody ever fusses about Egypt's wall and fence, but it's there. Now, on the other hand, there are obviously problems with Egypt because Israel discovered massive numbers of tunnels that went from Gaza into Egypt. And it was through those tunnels that all of its armaments and supplies came. What that probably means is that there was a lot of corruption on the Egyptian side. There was a lot of money being paid, and they were allowing this to happen. This is the way of life here. There's this corruption everywhere. So a lot of people were getting paid off and getting paid a lot of money to allow those things to happen. So Egypt is officially not a problem, but because of corruption and because the Sinai Peninsula is such a big piece of land that is largely ungoverned, it could be a problem. But I don't think it's as much of one as Hezbollah in the north and some pockets of Hamas and other groups in Syria. And then I don't know if you remember this, but on Tish B'Av, on August 12, 13, the IRGC had set up, they had closed the airspace over a province that's on the far western border of Iraq, which is a province they control, and it's the closest they could get to Israel. And supposedly they were going to be running, war games or something like that, and that's why they closed the airspace. But they closed it for that day, which indicated, at least to me, that they were ready to also assault Israel from that location.
Sure, there's intelligence there for sure.
The closest place in which, and then of course there are the Houthis in Yemen. Yemen's a long ways away, but no, all this to say, something big has to happen between now and the end of the year. Who will go first? Will it be Iran? Will it be Israel? If Israel goes in, it will have to go in with the tacit at least tacit, implicit approval, maybe not official approval of the U.S., and it will have to go in and it will have to strike very, 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 very quickly. I don't know. I don't see how they can destroy these tunnels that Hamas has built into bedrock. That's going to be very hard. They're going to have drones, and U.S. drones are already doing this, in fact, monitoring where these rockets are fired from. They come up from under the ground, boom, they fire and they close back up. It's going to be difficult. But at the same time, they're going to have to hit Iran. It will have to be like all at once. And it won't be just Iran. They have the same problem with Iran that they do with Hezbollah. Its nuclear development labs and factories are deep, deep, deep under mountains.
Again, I have a real problem with the back and forth on what's possible and what's not possible, because they can send drones with the ability to target a car, and not just the car, but the person sitting in the back right seat. You've seen like video, that's possible. They can target specific people with facial recognition and the ability to control these things now through AI and robotics and drones and all this kind of stuff. I personally believe Israel wouldn't have a problem sending, military, technology in to target whatever site it would need to destroy or whatever. It's just, I think, how much do they want to flex and how much do they want to put all that on the line for diplomacy or for international, saving face internationally, to be seen as the great terror now. There's always a flip side to the coin. Whenever you're pro-Israeli, you love it when they strike Iran. But if you're anti-Israeli, it just gives you more fodder to want to go in there and destroy them. But I don't see there being any challenge for Israel to go in and just wipe out whatever nuclear sites there are.
They are able to strike with great precision, as you said, when the targets are above ground. And that's what they did in Beirut, and that's what they did in Tehran and taking out Isfahan. And that's how they've taken out Hamas leaders in Gaza. It's been when they are above ground. They have intelligence. Their intelligence is amazing. They use all kinds of high-tech stuff to track, using their cell phones, whatever, to find out where they are, and then the rockets will go in and they pinpoint and they hit them with amazing precision. However, as we've learned in Gaza, when it's all underground, that's a different game. And so, even more so in Lebanon and in Iran, when they are tunneled deep into bedrock. I mean, I'm not a specialist by any means on munitions, but to get a bomb that can destroy a lab that is, hundreds of feet below the surface in bedrock, it's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. I agree with that.
What Israel has done is they have often what their alternatives are. They'll use cyber, and they will use other means of infiltration to get things into those labs. I mean, a year or so ago, there was an explosion in one of the labs underground, and it turns out that a desk had been taken in, and one of the legs of the desks had been hollowed out with, C4 or something, right?
Sure. That's what I'm saying. It's a spy game, right? So I hope that our governments have just as good of cleverness. If they're sending us, these suicide bombers and sort of these more rogue, raw, instruments of death, I would assume that with all of Israelis, superpower and even America, that we have the upper hand when it comes to figuring out how to infiltrate a tunnel system and blow something up if we wanted to. Obviously, you have to spend resources where they make sense. But if you're worried about a nuke coming in, or you're worried about some of these things, I would think that you'd be putting pretty much all of your efforts into infiltrating those things, whether it's through spy networks or through some sort of smoke them out kind of system. And I don't know. It's just a fascinating kind of idea that. Go ahead.
I think if Israel and the U.S. allows it, or if Israel attacks, and it does so in Lebanon and Tehran, especially those in Iran, I don't think it's going to be just going after the tunnels or the missiles. They're going to go after the economies. They will destroy airports. They will destroy shipyards, ports, and Iran has a small island right off of its coast in the Persian Gulf. It's very tiny, but it is the place where 80-90% of its oil is imported and exported. It would be simple to take it out and knock out that economy. They already are having difficulty there. And if they take out their shipyard in, I think, Isfahan, in Bandar Abbas, which is right on the Strait of Hormuz, that also would destroy their ability to import and export goods and services. If the economies fall, the governments are likely to, the governments are probably going to fall too. A whole lot of Iran does not like its government. A lot of the people there, they came out of a modern culture before they were taken over back in, what was it, 70 something, right? So there's a lot of unhappiness with the government. And so if they can, they will not only need to go after the weapons, but they'll also need to go after the economies. And I think that's what will happen. And it will have to be a blitz. It will have to be something all at once. And then I think very, very, and most important of all, none of this is going to work unless God blesses it, unless he intervenes. And we've seen him answer prayer. We really, really need to keep praying. Mm-hmm. We need to put on the armor of God. It's something that, the helmet of salvation and the
righteous
belt of truth.
Yep.
Actually, I find it helpful to actually do the motions of putting it on, and then taking up the sword of the Spirit and lifting the shield of faith. I like to think. By the way, I like to think of the shield of faith as a 360-degree force field.
Sure.
Around. This is how I like to picture it, which goes to my sci-fi. I guess my sci-fi. I like science fiction, but I can see like a force field going around, so it protects on all sides. And then I think oftentimes we look at Ephesians 6 as somehow we are in a defensive posture. No. We do all this, and it's to go on the offense.
Sure.
The picture here was of Roman soldiers, and that's mainly what you see in what Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 6. Interestingly enough, they always went in a troop, and they were in a square or a rectangle. Some people have used Ephesians 6 and said, well, God didn't give you any armor from behind because he intends you to always advance. Well, that isn't the way the Romans worked. The Romans actually, the troops were in a rectangle, and they all put up these shields, which went from ground, and they made a shield. So somebody was always covering your back, somebody else. These were not soldiers fighting in isolation. So we are meant, if that's applicable to what Paul wrote in Ephesians 6, we are meant to do this as a troop, together. Yes, there will always be the need for some special operatives to go out on their own, right? But most people fighting, putting on the full armor of God, need to do it. We need to do it together. There needs to be a call. We are doing this, and so we are. Inasmuch as Abba authorizes you to do so, we say to the angel of the Most High God, we call on you to stand guard, right? We don't do this with arrogance at all, or assuming that somehow we have a magical power. But I think we have the authority to say something.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you in bringing in.
We need to fight. We need to fight. We need to pray, because this situation is dire.
Yes.
It is really, really serious. And I guess I feel it perhaps more because for me, it's in my backyard. For America, it's thousands of miles away, but America is not exempt. We're in a global situation, and things could easily blow up everywhere in the world.
Yeah, and we have a lot of landmass, but we are still considered the great Satan. The West is not, widely hailed in the global world because, obviously we've produced rock and roll and, milkshakes and Coca-Cola and those sorts of things. But we've also, they would put us in the category of being warmongers that have destroyed, a lot of things.
Well, they also say we're corrupt, and they're right.
Yeah, there's definitely more immorality that comes with.
I mean, the immorality is huge, and the proliferation of pornography, that's a U.S. export around the world.
Absolutely.
And so the imams of the world, and even the non-religious communist states like China, they see that corruption. You cannot access, well, you can if you want to use a VPN, but you can't access most American website stuff in China. China is a hugely sophisticated country. I've got to throw in something here. My youngest son, Jonathan, just arrived in Chongqing, China. I didn't know what Chongqing, China was, but it's like a city of 40 million people.
Sure.
I mean, it's huge. And the technology they have there, the sophistication is mind-blowing. But he can't access even Google without using a VPN.
Yep. So I went to China in 2007, and I wrote a book, fascinating book, if you ever go to China, called China Road. And it basically tells the story from Shanghai, which I was in Shanghai, all the way to the western part of China. Now, what's fascinating, I didn't know this until I went there in 2007, is the Uyghurs. So the Muslim groups are on the west side of China. The Uyghurs they're a very, very much enslaved community. They're tortured, they're killed. The Chinese people, and it's fascinating because the Chinese government, yes, they're very sophisticated, they're very, locked down, they got their talons in everybody, but if it's a numbers game. If the people revolted, it wouldn't take long for them to be able to overcome the government system, because those cities, you say there's 40 million in some of these cities, that's a average. These cities have massive populations, and they are just trying to keep the lid on it. And that's why they have to keep the information under control, because if there's ever this moment where the people get educated and sort of become enlightened, that they've been so brainwashed that I think there's probably a generational thing that would happen. But the younger people who are poor and enslaved, they could overcome their masters quickly. And so I was there firsthand, and I witnessed just the different mindset that's there. They have rules on how many kids that you can have, where you can work, how you can work, who you can marry, how you can travel. And I saw in 2007 experienced the same thing. Just the information I had access to. I went to Beijing and I went to a church service there at an expat church, and that was the only way to really worship freely. Everything else is underground, so the faith is underground. A lot of people are tortured and persecuted for their faith, and that's where I think Americans just sort of get obese and gluttonous with how much we can enjoy of our faith. We need to understand that there are people being persecuted, and there are people like you, Brian, and your fiance's parents who are actually under physical assault, and the prayers matter. Your faith matters, and I do think that the force field approach to this idea of spiritual warfare is important, because the Bible uses old allegory, and my whole thing is Jesus coming really back on a horse? Are we going back to like the pre Model T 4 days? Are we going back to the 1800s with Jesus? I actually believe that whatever he's coming in on is going to be a souped up version of whatever's possible, because if Elon Musk can make a Cybertruck, I'm pretty sure Jesus can make something way better than that. So I'm hoping that we don't have to go back to shoeing horses and blacksmith days, that we can actually advance forward with like technology that really makes sense to our understanding of technology. And I think with praying in Sunday school growing up, we had a song we used to sing about the armor of God, and so my whole mindset has been kind of brainwashed to the Roman allegory, of just what that looks like. But truthfully, you're right. I mean, we should be thinking of it as, what it takes to defeat our enemy in today's terms, and don't use old weapons for new problems. And I just think that it's important when you talk about pornography. I mean, for a mind, the helmet of salvation. Salvation's supposed to wash your brain and your mind, and it's supposed to protect you. And you have to think of it differently than a
Yeah.
old Roman helmet. You should think of it like you just said. The salvation should cover you in a different way and in a more sophisticated way. So, hey, listen, I could talk to you all day long.
Yeah,
You're
this is
amazing.
great.
I know you have a heart out. So, I will definitely, everyone out there listening, please pray for Brian, pray for Israel, pray for safety. Your prayers matter. Obviously, from Brian's report yesterday, they were answered last week with the protection of Israel. So praise God for that. Brian, in the afternoon, you look amazing. I don't know if you look like in the morning, but you're looking great over there.
Great, thanks. All right, I'm going to go have dinner.
Okay, I'm going to have breakfast.
All right. Thanks, Brent. Good to see you.
Ciao for now. Take care.
Bye. Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.